Hello everyone, and welcome to this talk about a game-based learning intervention for support classes in mathematics. Though this title sounds a little bit pretentious, so I'd rather call it I Play Kahoot with university students, and they liked it. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Alvaro, I am Spanish, and I'm a second-year PhD student here in the Maths department at Warwick. Besides that, I'm also a graduate teaching assistant in the Mathematical Institute. And in the last 2 years that I spent here at Warwick, I've taught support classes for courses such as Algebra 2, Galois Theory, or Hyperbolic Geometry. If you've never heard about these courses before, they are courses of pure mathematics and with a very high abstract algebraic content. So before talking about this intervention, I would like to give you some context. So imagine you're an undergrad student studying a class in mathematics. The most common things that you'll have around 4 hours of lectures a week, 4 hours of classes. And out of these 4 hours of classes, 3 hours will be lectures given by a senior professor in a very huge lecture theatre with around 100 to 300 students. But also once a week, you'll have a support class, which will be a smaller class taught by a graduate teaching assistant like me, with 50 to 40 students at most. And these kind of classes are meant to be, unlike lectures, more interactive. And the idea is that the students come to our classes and then they ask questions and we solve some exercises together to make sure that the content that is taught in the lectures gets really learned and the students really get the chance to really work with the concepts they have been presented in the lectures. So, talking with graduate teaching assistants from the Maths department, we have all noticed that we usually have more or less the same issue. And this is not a problem that, as far as we are concerned, is specific to Maths. It happens in many other scientific disciplines, which is that in our support classes, we have lots of students coming from very diverse backgrounds, and they have very different degrees of engagement with the course. And what this translates into is that our support classes usually have students that have very different understandings of the lectures and they have different knowledge of the course. And, you know, this is a problem that everyone who's a teacher kind of less suffers, but for us it's particularly difficult for the following reason that I'm going to explain. So in our support classes, as I have mentioned, we usually deal with more practical exercises, and the one that you can see on the screen is an exercise I could easily be doing in one of my support classes. It will be something like prove that every field satisfies the following simple property. And I presume not all of one here knows maths, so you may be wondering, oh, what's a field? Well, a field is a mathematical object, which is a mathematical object called a ring that satisfies certain axioms. And you may be wondering, wait, but what is a ring? Well, a ring is another kind of mathematical object, which is something called a group, that satisfies certain properties. And you may be wondering, what's a group? And you can continue and say, oh, a group is a monoid. What's a monoid? A monoid is a set. So maths, particularly the most algebraic subjects, is characterized for having these kind of like big definitions, big concepts that that are composed by many other concepts. So the knowledge kind of like piles up and creates these very difficult definitions that you need a lot of background to understand. And this is really a big issue when you're trying to solve exercise, right? Because in an ideal world, every one of your students will know what a field is and you'll be able to solve the exercise I have previously mentioned. But 99% of the time what will happen is that some of your best students may know what a field is, but the majority of your students need to be refreshed about this concept that probably have learned a few weeks ago. And some of your students may be completely clueless about what you're talking about. So when you get presented, when I go to one of my lectures or my support classes and I have to solve this exercise that says prove that every field satisfies the following simple property, by starting with that, I might have already lost half of the class because half of the class don't remember what this object that we have to work on is. So I was thinking of a possible idea of an intervention to solve this kind of problem, and some people suggested how about you do some quiz before the class, and I decided to take this this suggestion, and I decided to start creating quizzes using a platform called Kahoot. So what is Kahoot? In case you have not heard of it, so Kahoot is an online learning platform that enables teachers to create educational quizzes. So the idea is that you prepare your quiz before the class, and then when the class comes, you project it on the blackboard and your students play with their phones. And if you have never seen it, it's kind of like this kind of like interactive game. It's very similar to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. So there's a timer that goes down, and when either it goes to 0 or everyone has answered the question, it reveals the answer. And so yeah, I try to implement this into my sport classes, and the experience is very positive. So I would want to encourage all of you to use this kind of intervention. And rather than speak about how I create my quizzes, which is very simple because Kahoot is a very intuitive platform, what I would like to give you today is 4 tips in case you are considering implementing a game-based intervention in your class on some quiz in the style of Kahoot. So these are my 4 tips. My first tip, I would say, is control the times. So, this kind of like, one of my favorite things about Kahoot is that it really makes students be very engaged with the course, and they will really love this. But you should remember what the goal of this intervention is, which is, to be an introduction for the other exercises, the other things that you have to cover in your support class. So I would always advise everyone who's planning to implement these quizzes into their classes to just spend at most 25% of the time in your support class doing this quiz, and use the rest of the class to cover the content that you want to cover. In this case, to solve practical exercises, to answer questions from the students, and so on. So that's my first tip. My second tip will be to try to engage with all students. So as I have mentioned before, students will probably be very engaged with this. I feel like every student loves playing with this quizzing contest. However, it is very tempting sometimes to try to, when you do your first Kahoot, your first quiz, everyone seems to get like very good grades, very good grades. Everyone seems to be doing very well, and you may be tempted to like make the questions more and more difficult. But this is not ideal because it defies the point of what you're trying to achieve, which is refreshing the definitions, refreshing the concepts that students need to know for your support class. So a good rule of thumb that has worked well for me is to more or less use half of the questions in your quiz to refresh some basic material from your class, and then do maybe 3 questions, so 3 or 4 questions about the definitions that require a bit more thinking, that require a little bit more working with the concepts that you have refreshed, and maybe at the end add like 1 or 2 questions a little bit more challenging to kind of like stimulate those students who are up to date with the course and who wants to learn more. My third tip will be not to spend too much time preparing. So as I had mentioned earlier, I'm not a teacher full time, so I have other things to do besides teaching, and you can really spend as much time as you want preparing Kahoots, but my advice is to just be considerate with your time and use at most like 30 minutes if you need to prepare, let's say, 10 questions. And another thing that it just has worked very well for me is to, instead of doing a quiz every week, more like space the quizzes between sessions so that they kind of feel like a prize instead of like being something that students expect every day. And then finally, my last tip is to get feedback and use it. So if you do these kind of quizzes using Kahoot, at the end of the quiz, you'll receive a report with how well the students are doing. And you can use this opportunity to just see, first of all, the material that students need to work more, but also see which students may need a little bit more help. And yeah, I feel like the surveys that have been conducted in the department have shown that the students are very happy with these quizzes, and they have, all the people have said very positive things about it, how fun and pretty well made are done, and how they actually help them know what they have understood and what they haven't. So I would recommend anyone who's interested in using this game-based intervention to give it a try and see how they do. So yeah, I think that's everything I had to say. Thank you all for watching. And if you have any questions, just please send me an email and I'll be happy to answer to them.